Smith County, now the newest county in Southwest Virginia to become a Second Amendment sanctuary.
Tonight, Bedford County became the latest place in our area to declare itself a Second Amendment sanctuary.
The list of Second Amendment sanctuaries is growing tonight.
Otero joined Fremont, Custer, Montezuma counties in their stance against the red flag gun bill.
Washington State Police Chief wants to make his community a sanctuary city.
And Tennessee counties are taking notice, with 5 in the eastern part of the state passing resolutions to become Second Amendment sanctuary counties.
And the Hood County Sheriff wants to make sure the people who own firearms are protected. He tells Alex Rozier he wants to create a sanctuary county for guns.
Well, what exactly is happening out there that all these sheriff's departments from different localities and communities from all across the country are implementing this concept of a Second Amendment sanctuary? And this isn't some singular locale. This is happening in numerous states and has been now for the past year. Well, it could be a sign of the times we live in. We've watched as our First Amendment rights, our right to free speech, have been eroded away with the implementation of a concept of hate speech as corporations work with the government to limit what you say and how you say it and who you say it to and when you say it. We've seen the insidious nature of political correctness shackle us and take away our ability to express ourselves in the way I don't think our founders would have ever thought would be possible. And it's a perfect example. What's happened with the First Amendment is the perfect example of why people are so wary of what is now taking place with the Second Amendment. It is something that is gradual in its nature, a very slow-acting poison. And by the time the symptoms hit, by the time you're so weakened and bedridden, you're unable to do anything about it. You can't fight back. You've succumbed so far that you're not able to raise your voice up anymore. And what exactly is happening with the Second Amendment? Well, there's a massive introduction of different laws that are being put in place to restrict the sort of guns you can own, how you can procure those guns, where you can buy, sell, and trade those guns, the sorts of ammunitions that you can obtain, and how you can obtain them. And perhaps worst of all is the introduction of red flag laws. Red flag laws, which are something ripped right out of a science fiction movie for a future crime you might potentially commit.
Anderson, wait!
The back row.
Wait! Anderson, wait! Anderson, wait!
Maybe it's a loved one. Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend, a coworker. Maybe the guy at McDonald's making a burger for you just didn't like the way you looked at him. And so now here come law enforcement to take away your weapons because they need to assess if you might pose a risk. You haven't done anything yet. You haven't committed a crime yet. But they're going to take your guns anyway. And if you just so happen to get shot when they come to take your guns, well, that's your own damn fault.
Police say just after 5, 2 officers tried serving an extreme risk protective order on 60-year-old Gary Willis. Police say he answered the door holding a gun, placed it down, and stepped outside to speak to the officers.
Once they explained to him that he was the respondent of an order and that they would be taking his guns, he became irate, went back in the house, grabbed the gun. The first officer in the door grabbed the gun as well. They started tug-of-warring for the gun, and the suspect fired 1 shot from the gun. Luckily, that didn't hit anybody, but once that shot went off, the second officer fired his service weapon, striking the suspect.
And this year-long escalation of what's going on with gun rights in America has really coalesced, and it's centered itself over Virginia, where headlines like this are now making the rounds. The law is the law. Virginia Democrats float prosecution and National Guard deployment if police don't enforce gun control. The Democratic officials which are quoted in this article are not only saying that they're going to have sheriffs fired for not following orders, that they're going to strip away the budgets of any county that refuses to oblige their gun grabbing, but they've gone so far as to say they have suggested to the Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, that he should bring in the National Guard and have them police over 75 counties. 75 counties out of the 90-plus counties in Virginia, which are refusing to go along with these new laws that are being proposed in the state right now. And this clear escalation in the rhetoric regarding the Second Amendment from all of these different bureaucrats and elected politicians who seem to believe they've been given God's divine will to protect people from themselves and strip them of their rights has really brought attention upon Virginia. and got a lot of people talking about it. The National Guard itself gave a response on social media, a very nonplussed response, a very non-committal response. And it's easy to understand why they don't want to jump in head first when it comes to this issue. All you need to do is look at what others in law enforcement and government are saying about this. There is a tangible fear in the air.
I work plainclothes law enforcement. I walk around without a uniform. People don't see my badge. People don't see my gun. And I can tell you, people are angry. And I am frightened to the point that I am looking at moving my wife and child, my child to be, March, my wife and child out of the state if these bills pass. The reason is because my fellow law enforcement officers, I've heard on more than one occasion, tell me that they would not enforce these bills regardless of whether they believe in them ideologically, because they believe that there are so many people angry in gun shops, gun shows, at bars. We have heard it now. People talking about tar and feathering politicians in a less than joking manner. People talking about fighting with violence over their concern with Senate Bill 16 and Senate Bill 64.
So you can imagine being in law enforcement and hearing citizens at different locations all over town talk about lynching and tar and feathering politicians for even suggesting bringing in the National Guard or taking their guns away. Why people are really on edge about this particular issue. Take, for instance, this conversation that took place between the Attorney General and Delegate Jay Jones from Norfolk, in which Jones writes, "The bills being passed by the General Assembly and signed into law by the governor are binding for our entire Commonwealth and its citizens. The legal precedents it would set by allowing communities to selectively ignore these laws at will is alarming and indicative of the same mindset that nearly 150 years ago led this country to dissolve into a civil war." And looking at the crowds in the streets that have been gathering in protest, you can start to see why people are getting concerned. They're showing up and protesting outside of courthouses, they're gathering at local municipalities, and they're letting their voice be heard. These aren't one or two gun nuts out in the hills in Alabama, hunting rabbits and skinning deer. These are average, ordinary people. Now, when you hear a story like this, the first thought that probably pops into your mind is it's a David and Goliath situation. The citizens are the little guys, and the government, backed by the National Guard, are just undefeatable. There's nothing that can be done. Well, the first thing you need to take into consideration is the sheriffs in Virginia outnumber the amount of deployable Army National Guard by almost 1,000. And those numbers are bolstered by sheriffs who are so committed to this that they're willing to deputize not hundreds, but thousands of people.
I do have a legal right to swear in deputies, and that's been the same for hundreds of years here in the Commonwealth for any sheriff.
And others might say that might be okay for a handful of people, but if you deputize hundreds or thousands, that sounds like a militia in the making.
Hopefully the measures that they're hoping to approve won't actually pass and won't be necessary. But if they do enact those laws that they're proposing, restricting everything from the so-called assault weapons to high-capacity magazines and other things, let alone the red flag laws, my stance will be to, if need be, if it's passed, swear in hundreds or even thousands of citizens as auxiliary deputies. We have thousands of concealed carry permit holders in the county currently.
Two other things to take into consideration are what's happened in the past and what the current climate is like right now and how people are reacting to it. Maybe you remember a little incident called the Bundy land grab, where the Bureau of Land Management tried to roll up with armored cars and assault weapons, sending in their troops to steal a man's property. They're going to take his possessions from him. Remember what happened with that? Well, his neighbors and people in the community came out to support him, stood shoulder to shoulder with him against government and law enforcement forces. Goddamn cowboys rode in, people set up sniper positions on the overpass, and the government ran for the goddamn hills. And a more current example of this would be what happened with a Instagrammer by the name of Whiskey Warrior 556. Now, at the time, it was believed he was being served with a red flag warrant. They were coming to take away his high-capacity magazines.
Serious question. To the boys in blue, the thin blue line, what's it like to arrest someone on the grounds of high-capacity magazines, which 30 rounds is standard capacity, just for the record? What's it like to know that the Founding Fathers would shit on you?
Now, details of the story later came out that wasn't actually the case, but his live stream drew in a lot of attention.
So what do you call a cop that enforces gun laws? A red coat faggot!
With a lot of people really monitoring the situation and gear up and go down to show support, much like what happened with Bundy. Right now in Virginia, it is the perfect storm. Up to the north, you have D.C., where an impeachment against the president is taking place, headed by the Democrats, who seem to want to write their own rules of conduct on how to conduct this impeachment inquiry. It seems like a political hit job. Sour grapes about losing the 2016 election and looking to make sure he can't possibly win 2020. In the meantime, you have a democratically controlled state government looking to implement extraordinarily strict gun laws within the state, and people not wanting that to happen. Sheriff's departments saying, no, we aren't going to enforce it. Citizens gathering at town hall meetings and declaring their county's Second Amendment sanctuaries, protesting at the state government buildings. Sheriff's department saying they'll deputize people, and local law enforcement hearing people on the street talk about tar and feathering politicians. All of these things are culminating. It's all gathering together in a little pressure cooker. And all it's going to take to set it off is just one singular fuck-up. The wrong person at the wrong time in front of a big enough audience. If the government sends in the National Guard, if they start firing sheriffs, if they serve a red flag warrant on somebody, and some kid gets killed, or some innocent citizen gets killed, or people decide they've had enough and they stand up to it, who knows what chain of events that is going to set off. But right now, Virginia is a state to pay attention to. Because you can feel it. It's tangible, it's electric, it's in the air. But my fear is, as I watch what happens in Virginia, that this particular saying is going to end up having a very real meaning very soon.
From my cold, dead hands.